Lisa wiped her hands on her apron, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 10 p.m., and her shift at the diner had been a blur of greasy plates and exhausted customers. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up out of habit, expecting another trucker or late-night straggler. Instead, a towering figure ducked through the doorway. Her breath caught for a moment. It was Shaquille O'Neal. The diner fell silent. Even the clatter of utensils paused as heads turned toward the NBA legend. He wore a hoodie and joggers, blending in as much as someone his size could. Lisa quickly regained her composure, reminding herself he was just another customer. She grabbed a menu and approached his table, her hands trembling slightly. "Good evening," she said, trying to sound calm. "What can I get for you?" Shaq smiled, his presence warm and disarming. "Just some coffee and a burger, please. Extra pickles if you've got 'em." Lisa nodded, scribbling down the order. As she walked back to the kitchen, she could feel the other diners stealing glances at him, their whispers barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. She couldn't help but wonder why someone like him would stop at their rundown diner in the middle of nowhere. When she brought his food, Shaq struck up a casual conversation. He asked her name, how long she'd worked there, and if the late shift was always this quiet. Lisa hesitated but answered honestly. She'd been working at the diner for 3 years, ever since her husband left her and their young son. The hours were tough, but it was all she had to keep the lights on and food on the table. Shaq listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," he said. Lisa shrugged, not wanting to dwell on her struggles in front of a stranger, let alone someone famous. She busied herself wiping the counter, keeping her back to him as the conversation faded. A few minutes later, Shaq finished his meal and stood to leave. "Thanks for the food," he said, placing a folded napkin on the counter along with a $100 tip. Lisa blinked, stunned by the amount. She looked up to thank him, but his expression stopped her. "Read it when you're alone," he said quietly, his eyes unusually serious. Then he turned and walked out into the chilly night, the bell jingling softly behind him. Curiosity tugged at Lisa as she grabbed the napkin. She unfolded it, expecting a simple thank you note or maybe an autograph. Instead, her heart sank as she read the words scrawled in bold handwriting. Asterisk. "Leave this place. Something dark lingers here." Asterisk. A chill ran down her spine. She glanced around the diner, now eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered once, casting strange shadows across the walls. Her coworkers had already clocked out, leaving her alone to close. She tried to shake off the unease, chalking up the note to a strange joke. Maybe Shaq had a quirky sense of humor. But as she locked the doors and walked to her car, the feeling of being watched lingered. Lisa tried to shake off the strange feeling as she settled into her car, but the words on the napkin haunted her thoughts. Something dark lingers here. It was such an odd thing to write, especially from someone like Shaquille O'Neal. She told herself it was probably a joke, something to spook her in good fun. Still, as she drove home, she couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror more than usual, her unease growing with every passing mile. When she arrived at her small apartment, her son, Jamie, was fast asleep on the couch, a blanket half draped over him. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, gave her a kind smile as she stepped out of the kitchen. "He was no trouble, just a little angel," the elderly woman said softly. Lisa thanked her and walked Mrs. Henderson to the door. She was grateful for the help, but even after the door clicked shut, the sense of unease lingered. She locked the deadbolt and double-checked the windows before sitting on the couch. Her fingers absently played with the napkin in her pocket, unfolding and refolding it as she replayed the events of the night. Something about Shaq's tone, his serious expression, and those strange words gnawed at her. She finally set the napkin aside, refusing to let it consume her. She needed to focus on the practical things, getting Jamie to school, paying rent, and making it through another shift tomorrow. She turned off the light and went to bed, her exhaustion overpowering her unease. The next day at the diner, things felt off. The morning started as usual, with the regulars trickling in for coffee and eggs. But the air seemed heavier, the space somehow colder despite the sunny weather outside. Lisa brushed it off as her imagination. She refused to let one strange note affect her entire day. Around lunchtime, though, the strange incidents began. It started with the coffee machine. As Lisa poured a cup for a customer, the machine sputtered and hissed, the liquid suddenly turning a murky, rust-colored red. She yanked her hand back in alarm, the hot liquid narrowly missing her skin. The customer leaned over to look, his face twisting in confusion. "Is that blood?" he muttered. Lisa shook her head quickly, her heart racing. "Just a malfunction. I'll get you a fresh cup." She dumped the pot and scrubbed the machine furiously, but when she looked at the discarded liquid in the sink, it was plain black coffee again. By mid-afternoon, the jukebox, an old, battered relic that rarely worked, sprang to life on its own. Static filled the room, followed by distorted music that didn't sound like any song Lisa recognized. It was eerie, like a warped lullaby played on broken instruments. Her coworker, Maria, walked over and gave it a firm slap, muttering something in Spanish. The music stopped, but the unease it left behind lingered. "Damn thing's always breaking," Maria said with a shrug. Lisa forced a smile but didn't respond. She couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't just coincidences. As the day wore on, more oddities piled up. The lights flickered sporadically, a couple of dishes shattered for no reason, and the air in the diner felt colder than usual, almost damp. When Lisa mentioned it to Maria, she just laughed. "This place has always been a little weird," she said. "You get used to it." Lisa wanted to press her for more, but the lunch rush interrupted their conversation. By the time her shift ended, she was more on edge than ever. The diner was empty as she wiped down the counters, the shadows stretching long and dark in the corners of the room. She heard a faint whisper. Her head snapped up, and she froze, her breath catching in her throat. She scanned the room, but no one was there. The sound came again, low and indistinct, like a voice carried on the wind. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Lisa backed toward the door, her heart pounding. She felt a sudden urge to leave, to get as far from the diner as possible. Her hands shook as she grabbed her things and bolted out the door. At home, Lisa tried to calm herself, but the fear wouldn't fade. She put Jamie to bed and stayed up late scrolling through her phone, searching for anything about the diner's history. Most of what she found was unremarkable, just a small, family-owned business that had been around for decades. But buried in an old article, she found a mention of several disappearances in the area during the 1970s. The missing people were last seen near the diner. Lisa's stomach churned as she read the details. No bodies were ever found, and the cases went cold. The article hinted at rumors of foul play but offered no evidence. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Could Shaq have known about this? Was that what his note meant? She didn't want to believe it, but the strange events of the day had shaken her. As much as she wanted to write it off as paranoia, deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Lisa folded the napkin again, her fingers trembling. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Something dark really did linger here. The next morning, Lisa couldn't shake the dark thoughts swirling in her mind. Her hands trembled as she prepared breakfast for Jamie, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the diner's strange history. The missing people, the eerie incidents, it was too much to ignore now. She had to know more. After dropping Jamie off at school, Lisa made her way back to the diner. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the parking lot. She felt the weight of dread settle heavily on her chest as she entered, the bell above the door jingling quietly. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers hunched over their mugs of coffee. The familiar smell of bacon and eggs filled the air, but it couldn't mask the strange tension that gripped the place. Lisa started her shift slowly, her mind racing with questions. She kept an eye on the door, half expecting Shaq to walk in again, though she knew that was highly unlikely. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a strange pull to the booth he'd sat in last night. Maria noticed her staring at the empty seat. "You okay, Lisa?" Lisa forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Yeah, just tired." She couldn't explain it, but something about that spot seemed to hold an eerie presence, like a shadow that lingered in the air. She didn't want to dwell on it, so she focused on her work, ignoring the growing unease. But her attention was drawn again when one of the truckers, an older man with a thick beard, cleared his throat and waved her over. "Hey, hon," he said, his voice gravelly. "You from around here?" Lisa nodded. "Born and raised." "Why?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You ever hear the stories about this place? The ones they don't tell the tourists?" Her stomach flipped, and she instinctively looked over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. The trucker lowered his voice further. "This diner's been around for a long time. More than 50 years, right? But there's something about it. Something bad." Lisa's heart raced as she leaned closer. "What do you mean?" The trucker glanced nervously at the others, then dropped his voice even lower. "People go missing. Always have. Used to be a lot more back in the day. Don't know if it's something in the walls or something else. But anyone who's stuck around too long, they vanish. Just like that. No one talks about it. Everyone just leaves." Lisa felt her blood run cold. She didn't want to believe him, but she couldn't ignore the creeping sense of dread that had settled over her. "Who's gone missing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The trucker shifted uncomfortably. "Too many to count. You're not from here, so you wouldn't know the names. But they're all people who worked here, waitresses, cooks. Never came back after their shifts." The hairs on the back of Lisa's neck stood up. Was Shaq's note trying to warn her about this? Was this why he'd left the cryptic message? Her hand shook as she grabbed a rag to wipe down the counter, not trusting her voice to speak. "Stay safe, sweetheart," the trucker added, his tone softening. "Just be careful." Lisa nodded absently, trying to push the conversation from her mind. But she couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The trucker finished his coffee and left without another word. Lisa stood frozen for a long moment, her thoughts spinning in a whirlpool of fear and confusion. Maria came up beside her, wiping her hands on her apron. "What did that guy want?" Lisa hesitated before answering. "Just stories about the place. About people who've worked here." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Old rumors. Nothing more. This place isn't haunted, if that's what you're thinking." Lisa forced a smile, but she could feel her pulse quicken. She didn't want to be paranoid, but the trucker's words kept echoing in her mind. The rest of the day passed slowly. Despite her best efforts to stay focused, Lisa kept hearing the trucker's voice in her head. Something bad had happened here, and the warning Shaq left her wasn't just a random joke. There was a curse tied to the diner, a curse that had lasted for decades. That evening, after her shift, Lisa decided to take a risk. She needed to find answers, even if it meant digging deeper into the diner's history. She knew the building had been around for more than 50 years, but there had to be something hidden in the past, something that tied the disappearances together. She drove to the town's small library, hoping to find records or old newspapers that might reveal more. The librarian, an older woman with thick glasses, gave her a curious look as she entered. "Can I help you, dear?" the librarian asked. Lisa smiled politely. "I'm just looking for some old records. About the diner. It's been around a while, and I've heard strange things about it." The librarian narrowed her eyes slightly. "Strange things? You'll have to be more specific." Lisa took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "People have gone missing. I heard it happened a lot back in the day. Can you help me find anything about that?" The librarian's face hardened, and she glanced around as if making sure no one else could hear. "You don't want to be asking about that," she said, her voice low. "Trust me, you don't." Lisa's stomach clenched, but she stood firm. "I need to know. Please, I have to find out what's going on." The librarian hesitated, then nodded slowly. She led Lisa to a dusty corner of the library, where old newspapers were stored in brittle, yellowing stacks. After a few minutes of searching, she pulled out a binder labeled 1970s. "Look through this," the librarian murmured. "It's all there. But don't say I didn't warn you. Lisa took the binder with a mix of dread and determination. As she flipped through the pages, she found article after article about missing persons, mostly women, all last seen working at the diner. Her heart sank as she read about the cases, all of them ending without answers. The last article she found was dated 1978. It was brief, but it made her stomach twist. Asterisk. No leads in the disappearance of waitress Abigail West. Last seen leaving work at the Old Town Diner. No evidence of foul play. The case remains open. Asterisk. The name struck Lisa like a bolt of lightning. Abigail West. Her mind raced. Had Shaq known about this? Was his warning meant for her to uncover the truth? The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. Lisa left the library with her mind racing. The air outside felt thick, oppressive, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Abigail West, she had to find out more. The name, the missing women, and the diner's long history of disappearances were all too connected to ignore now. Shaq's warning hadn't been a random note, and the chilling words, "Be careful," echoed in her mind like a mantra. She knew she couldn't handle this alone. But who could she turn to? Maria? She had worked alongside her for years, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that Maria had known more than she let on. The town's secrets were buried deep, and Maria was a part of it, whether she realized it or not. Lisa made her way back to the diner, determined to confront Maria. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly above her as she walked through the front door, the bell above it ringing softly. Maria was behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. She looked up when Lisa entered, her face expressionless. "I need to know everything," Lisa said, her voice low but firm. "About Abigail West. The other disappearances. This place, something's wrong here, Maria." Maria stiffened, her eyes flickering for a moment before she wiped her hands on her apron. "Lisa, you don't want to go down that road." Lisa could see the fear in her eyes. She had seen it before, buried beneath layers of indifference and routine. "Tell me. I can't just sit back and pretend nothing's happening." Maria sighed heavily, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. "The diner has a history, Lisa. A long one. People have come and gone, but there's always been something strange here. Something we've never been able to explain. And Abigail West, she was the one who got too close. She dug too deep into the history, started asking questions, and she vanished." Lisa's pulse quickened. "What happened to her?" "She disappeared. Just like the others. Everyone who dug into the diner's past, they were never seen again. There's a curse, Lisa. Something that's tied to this place. It's older than anything we know. The people who worked here, they were chosen for a reason." "A reason? Chosen for what?" Lisa's voice trembled with the force of her words. Maria looked at her, eyes wide with something Lisa couldn't quite place. Fear, regret, maybe guilt. She hesitated before speaking again, the weight of what she was about to reveal almost suffocating. "This diner, it was built on land that was cursed long before anyone opened it. A long time ago, a tragedy happened here. People died. The land was stained with their blood, and the curse took root. Anyone who stays too long gets pulled in. The people who worked here? They were part of a ritual. The diner wasn't just a place to eat, it was a place for the curse to feed." Lisa shook her head, trying to process the words. "A ritual? What kind of ritual?" Maria bit her lip, her gaze flickering to the kitchen door. "The curse has always demanded a price. It takes people. It feeds on them. And if you stay long enough, if you become part of the diner, it pulls you in. It's like a cycle that never ends." Lisa could barely breathe as the reality of what Maria was saying sank in. The people who worked here had been chosen, not by chance, but by something darker. Something supernatural. And Shaq's note had been a warning about it. He had known, he had to have known. He wasn't just some celebrity who happened to drop by. His presence in the diner had been part of the puzzle. Maria lowered her voice even further, as if the walls themselves might be listening. The curse is tied to Abigail's disappearance. She found something. Something she shouldn't have. She discovered the truth about the diner, about what was really happening, and it cost her. The others who vanished, they were sacrifices. The diner needs them to stay open. It needs their energy. And every time someone goes missing, it grows stronger. Lisa's stomach churned. She had always felt there was something off about the place, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. What do we do? How do we stop it? Maria shook her head. I don't know. No one's ever been able to stop it. It's been going on for decades. People come and go, but the curse remains. It's like a storm that never passes. If you stay too long, if you keep asking questions, it will come for you. Lisa felt the weight of Maria's words settle over her like a suffocating blanket. She wasn't just working in a diner, she was working in the epicenter of a malevolent force that had been feeding off the townspeople for generations. The terrifying thought that Jamie might one day be a part of that cycle filled her with a cold, numbing fear. She couldn't let that happen. I have to stop this, Lisa said, her voice shaking but resolute. If I leave, it will just keep happening. But if I can break the curse... Maria grabbed her arm, her grip tight. Don't. You don't understand. The curse doesn't let you leave. It's too late for that. You're already in it. Once you start digging, it won't let go. Lisa pulled her arm away, her eyes flashing with determination. I don't care. I'm not going to let my son grow up in this. I'm going to end this, Maria. I don't care what it takes. Maria looked at her with a mix of fear and sorrow, but there was something else in her eyes too, a flicker of hope, however small. You're brave, Lisa. But I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. The curse doesn't play fair. It'll take everything from you if it can. Lisa took a deep breath, the weight of the decision sinking in. She had to break the cycle. For herself. For Jamie. For everyone who had been lost to this place. She was ready to face whatever came next. No matter the cost. Lisa's breath was shallow, her chest tight as she gripped the worn leather of the note Shaq had left her. Every word on it had weighed heavily, a warning, a promise, and yet she still hadn't been able to fully understand the gravity of it until now. The diner was silent, but a tension in the air made it feel alive, watching. The pulse of the curse, though invisible, hummed beneath her feet. She could feel it, the anticipation, the way the room seemed to tremble in expectation. This was no longer just about a single mother and her son. It was about an ancient force bound to this place, tied to her family's bloodline. The curse had taken so much. It had stolen time, lives, and memories. And she had been blind to it until Shaq's visit, until his simple act of kindness, the note, which now seemed more like a lifeline than a cryptic riddle. She had dismissed the warning at first. Who would believe in such things? Ghosts, curses, ancient deals? But there she stood, in the diner, trapped by the very curse that had been passed down through generations, a curse that had nearly claimed her family's legacy. Her hands shook as she reread the note. The words burned into her mind, asterisk. The past is the key. The end is the beginning. Asterisk, what did that mean? The answer had been elusive, slipping through her grasp every time she tried to focus on it. And yet, in the quiet darkness of the diner, it felt like she had the answer within her reach. The air was oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. Every crack, every stain, every inch of the worn countertops seemed to bear the weight of her ancestors' mistakes. She glanced towards the kitchen door, her eyes landing on the old photograph on the wall, the faded black and white picture of the diner's original owners, their eyes cold and distant. She had seen it 1,000 times, but never truly looked at it. Now, it felt like a message, something more than just a snapshot of the past. Shaq's note hadn't just been a random act of kindness. It was as though he had known. Known about the curse that had long lingered over her family, known about the past that had been sealed away, and most importantly, known what needed to be done to stop it. But the answer was hidden in the past, and Lisa had to unlock it before the curse destroyed her family and anyone else who dared enter the diner. She made her way through the diner, each step more calculated than the last. Her mind raced with questions, but they were all tethered to one central truth: the curse had to be broken, and she was the one who had to do it. She didn't know how, or what she was supposed to do next, but she knew the diner held the answers. Her footsteps echoed across the empty room as she approached the old storage closet at the back of the diner. It was where they kept the supplies: cans of tomatoes, boxes of flour, sacks of potatoes, but today, it felt like a doorway to another world. She reached for the doorknob, feeling the cold metal beneath her fingers. The room beyond had always been a place of quiet storage, a place where she had never ventured into the deeper recesses. But now, as her hand gripped the door, she knew it was time to explore the corners that had remained untouched for so long. She opened the door, the smell of mildew and dust filling the air. It was colder than she remembered, colder than it should have been. Something wasn't right. She stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath her weight. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the forgotten boxes and crates piled high in the corners, but nothing stood out to her, not at first. Then she saw it. A trunk. It sat in the farthest corner of the room, half hidden behind a stack of crates. It was an old, wooden trunk, bound with rusted metal straps. The kind that seemed to carry more than just clothes or books. She could feel it, the weight of the past pressing against her chest. The curse. The legacy of betrayal. This was where it had started. Her pulse quickened as she approached the trunk. She felt a deep sense of foreboding, but at the same time, she couldn't stop herself. This was the key, she realized. The answers lay within. She bent down, her fingers trembling as she reached for the latch. It clicked open, and the lid creaked as she lifted it. Inside, there was nothing remarkable at first glance, just old linens, yellow documents, and faded photographs. But there, tucked in the back, was a leather-bound book. It wasn't like the others. This one felt alive in her hands, the pages crisp and brittle, like it had been waiting for this moment. She pulled it out, the air growing even colder as she opened it. The writing inside was in a language she didn't recognize, the words twisting and curling in strange patterns. But as her fingers traced the ink, something shifted. It was as if the book was calling to her, the words rearranging, shifting into something she could understand. It spoke of a pact made long ago by her ancestors, a deal sealed with blood and sacrifice. The diner, she realized, had never been just a diner. It had been the anchor, the place where the curse had been born. Her family's bloodline had been chosen, marked to serve as the keepers of the curse. The pact had bound them to the diner, and over time, it had twisted, turning into a force of darkness that claimed all who entered. The book was a map, a guide to breaking the curse, but it required a sacrifice, one that Lisa hadn't fully understood until now. Her mind raced as she read further. The ritual to break the curse was outlined in detail. It wasn't just about destroying the source. It was about confronting the past, about making peace with the mistakes that had led to this moment. And there, in the last line of the book, was a name. A name that made her blood run cold: Shaquille O'Neal. The connection hit her like a wave. The man who had left her the note, the man who had come into her life like a whirlwind, he wasn't just a celebrity. He had been part of the story all along, part of the ritual, and now, it seemed, he was a key player in undoing the curse. The note he had left wasn't just a warning, it was a call for help, a plea for someone to finally set things right. But as she closed the book, her thoughts began to shift. She realized that the cost of breaking the curse wouldn't be easy. There was a price to pay. And it was one that she might not be able to afford. Lisa sat in the corner booth, her fingers trembling as she stared down at the faded letter from Shaq. The weight of Maria's words pressed heavily on her chest, the reality of the curse settling in like a dense fog. She could feel the walls of the diner closing in, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead only adding to the oppressive atmosphere. She knew she was running out of time. Every second she spent in this place only seemed to draw her deeper into its sinister grip. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. The bell above the door rang softly, and Lisa looked up, half expecting to see Maria or another customer. But to her surprise, it was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, with a strong build and a face that looked like it had seen more than its fair share of trouble. His eyes scanned the diner, locking onto Lisa for just a moment before he walked toward the counter. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. There was something about this man, something unsettling. He seemed out of place, like he didn't belong here, but at the same time, he seemed oddly familiar. She couldn't put her finger on it, but his presence made the air feel even thicker, more suffocating. The man sat at the counter, and Lisa watched him, unable to look away. He ordered a coffee, his voice low and gravelly. As he waited, Lisa noticed the way his fingers tapped nervously on the countertop, almost as if he were trying to calm himself down. But there was no hiding the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. Something was off about him, and Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that he was connected to the strange events unfolding around her. The man turned slightly, catching her gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, he slid a small piece of paper toward her, his fingers brushing against hers in the process. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she reached for it, her eyes scanning the note. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic, and it read simply, **. You have to leave. You don't know what you're dealing with. It's already too late for me. **. Lisa's pulse raced. This wasn't just some random stranger. He knew something important. The urgency in his message was clear. He was trying to warn her. But why? And why now? Before Lisa could react, the man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He paid for his coffee, then turned and walked toward the door. As he reached for the handle, Lisa stood up, ready to follow, to demand answers. But just as her hand touched the door, he was gone. The diner's bell rang again, and Lisa stood frozen in place, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Who was that man, and why had he given her that note? Was he another victim of the curse, someone who had tried to warn her? Or was he something else entirely? The silence in the diner felt deafening now. She looked down at the note again, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it completely. The words were clear, but they didn't make any sense. Too late for me. What did that mean? Had he already been consumed by whatever force was haunting this place? Was she too late to save herself, to save Jamie? She couldn't let that be the case. She wouldn't let fear control her. If this man had somehow escaped the curse, or worse, had been swallowed by it, then Lisa had to figure out what had gone wrong. She had to find the truth and destroy it before it claimed anyone else. Her mind raced with thoughts, trying to connect the dots. The curse wasn't something that could be beaten with brute force. It was more insidious than that. It fed on fear, on desperation, on the people who couldn't escape its grasp. The note had been clear. She didn't understand what she was up against. But that was exactly why she had to keep going. Lisa looked up, her eyes scanning the diner once more. Everything felt different now. The air was thicker, as if it was alive, watching her. The shadows seemed deeper, and the flickering of the lights grew more erratic. She could feel something in the walls, in the very foundation of the building, a presence that had been there far longer than she had. She had been hoping for a simple answer, a way to escape. But that wasn't going to happen. There were no easy solutions. No quick fixes. The curse wasn't going to let her go. It had already set its sights on her. Her hand clenched into a fist, the note still crumpled in her palm. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to be another victim. She had come this far, and she couldn't let it end like this. Not when Jamie's future was on the line. Lisa took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest. She needed help. There was no way she could break the curse alone. Maria had warned her, but she had also hinted that there might be a way to fight back. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to find the key to the curse's power, to break its hold on the town. She turned and walked toward the back door, where the kitchen was. If there was any chance of finding something, anything that could help her, it had to be in the heart of the diner itself. This place wasn't just the setting for the curse, it was the source of it. As she stepped through the door, a strange chill filled the air. It wasn't just the temperature, it was as though the very room was alive, watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Lisa swallowed hard, her breath shallow, and stepped further into the kitchen, determined to find the answers she so desperately needed. She couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. Lisa stood in the kitchen, her mind racing as she looked around the dimly lit room. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, but it felt as though the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She had never felt so on edge in her life. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hide something sinister, something that had been waiting for her all this time. Her fingers curled around the edge of the counter, and she stared at the old photographs that lined the wall. They were faded, worn with age, but there was one in particular that caught her eye. It was a picture of the diner from long ago, its exterior looking much different, more vibrant. But the thing that made Lisa's blood run cold was the figure standing in the doorway. It was hard to make out, the photo being so old, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The man in the picture was tall, broad-shouldered, and his eyes seemed to pierce right through the photo, straight into Lisa's soul. It was him, the man who had left her the note. She didn't need to look closer to recognize the haunted look in his eyes. He was no stranger to the curse, no stranger to the horror that had taken root here. He had come for a reason, and Lisa was determined to figure out what it was. The note had been a warning, but it also felt like a plea for help. He had known something she didn't yet understand, but now she was starting to see the pieces fall into place. Lisa's heart raced as she pulled the photograph from its frame, carefully examining it for any clues she might have missed. There were no dates, no names, but she could feel something in the air, a connection between this man and the diner. He had been here before, and whatever he had encountered, whatever had destroyed him, was now waiting for her. She turned to the counter and grabbed a dish rag, wiping away the dust from an old ledger book that sat in the corner. The book was leather-bound, its pages yellowed and brittle. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, unsure of what she might find. But she had no choice. The note, the photographs, the man, they all pointed to one thing: she had to uncover the diner's dark history, and she had to do it fast. The first page of the ledger was filled with handwritten notes, names of employees and guests who had passed through the diner over the years. But as she flipped through the pages, a name caught her eye. It was a name she recognized, her own. Lisa had never seen it before, but there it was, scrawled in the same hurried handwriting as the note from Shaq. Lisa Madison, 1985. Her stomach twisted in knots. The ledger was old, but this entry was recent, far more recent than it should have been. It was as though her name had been placed there intentionally, as if someone had been waiting for her. But who? And why? Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a whisper so soft she could barely hear it over the pounding of her heart. It came from the back of the kitchen, a muffled voice. No, not a voice, a cry. It was faint, but unmistakable. It sounded like Jamie. Lisa's blood ran cold. She dropped the ledger, her feet moving before she could fully process the panic rising in her chest. She pushed through the door that led to the small storage room, her breath shallow, her hands shaking. She had to find Jamie. She couldn't let this place take her son, too. The storage room was cold, too cold, and the lights flickered above her. She stepped forward, her mind racing as she called Jamie's name. There was no response, but the sound of something shifting in the darkness made her freeze. She wasn't alone. Whatever it wasn't her son. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging the room into complete darkness. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as she spun around, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands groped for the door, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. And then, from the darkness, she heard it again, the whispering. It wasn't Jamie. It was something else, something older, something malevolent. It was a voice, but not a human voice. It was a voice that had been there long before she had ever set foot in this place. She backed up, her hands feeling the walls as she tried to find her bearings. The cold was unbearable, and her mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't just a curse, it was something more. It was a force, an entity that had been bound to this place, tied to the very walls of the diner. And now, it had her. It had her trapped, just like it had trapped the others before her. Lisa could hear it now, the voice growing louder, a low growl that sent a chill down her spine. She knew it was coming for her. She wasn't sure how, but she knew. The diner was alive, and it wanted something from her, something that she was only beginning to understand. Her hands scrambled across the floor, and finally, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She grabbed it, feeling the sharp edge of a knife. Without thinking, she raised it, her body tensing as she waited for the unseen presence to make its move. The whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. Lisa didn't move. She couldn't. She was paralyzed by fear, by the realization that she was caught in something far beyond her comprehension. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore, she was fighting for Jamie's. She had to stop whatever this was before it could take him, before it could claim another soul. And then, without warning, a figure appeared before her, cloaked in shadow. It was the man from the photograph, his face twisted in pain, his eyes pleading for release. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as he reached out toward her, his hands grasping at the air, his voice a tortured whisper. "Help me," he said, his voice barely audible, but full of desperation. "It's already too late for me, but you can stop it. You have to break the curse." Lisa's mind raced. She couldn't let fear control her now. She had to break the curse. For herself. For Jamie. For everyone who had been taken by this place. But how? How could she stop it when everything seemed stacked against her? The answer came to her, a flash of clarity in the midst of the terror. She wasn't alone. She had the note. She had the key. She just had to find the strength to use it. She gripped the knife tighter, the cold steel a reminder of her resolve. She wasn't going down without a fight. And she wasn't going to let this curse win. Lisa's heart raced as she stood in the suffocating darkness, the air thick with an unseen presence. Every inch of her body screamed for escape, but she knew there was no running from what had been set in motion. The man, the figure from the photograph, had vanished, but his words haunted her. The curse was real. It had claimed the diner, and now it was after her, after Jamie. She had no choice but to finish what had been started, to end the terror that had bound them all to this place. The knife felt heavy in her hand, an odd sense of calm washing over her as she clutched it. There was a purpose to this now. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting to break the chains that had held her family captive for generations. The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her, but it also gave her strength. She wasn't going to let this place win. Not now, not ever. Lisa's breath was shallow as she moved through the darkness, her senses heightened, every sound amplified. She could still feel the cold grip of the curse tightening around her, but she had a plan. The note Shaq had left her wasn't just a warning, it was a map, a guide to breaking the curse. It hadn't made sense at first, but now, in the quiet of the storage room, its meaning was crystal clear. It was all connected, the diner, the curse, the figure in the photograph, it all led back to the same source. She remembered the words from the note, the cryptic message that had seemed like nonsense at first, asterisk. The key is the past. The end is the beginning. Asterisk. It had been vague, but now she understood. The curse wasn't just tied to the diner's history, it was tied to her family's history. The diner had been built on the land where her ancestors had once lived, and they had made a deal, a pact that had gone horribly wrong. The curse wasn't just a supernatural force, it was a legacy, one that had been passed down through generations, and now, it was her turn to break it. Her pulse quickened as she approached the back door. The note had given her the final clue. The way to break the curse was hidden within the diner itself. The ritual had to be performed at the place where the curse had been born, at the site of the original betrayal. It was there that the past and the present would collide, where the chain could finally be severed. Lisa's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but she focused on one thing: Jamie. He was still out there, still at risk. She couldn't waste any more time. The ritual had to be performed, and she had to make sure that nothing would stand in her way. She reached the door and hesitated for a moment, steeling herself for what was to come. The darkness on the other side felt impenetrable, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her now. The air seemed to crackle as she opened the door, and she stepped out into the main dining area, where the shadows seemed to stretch and pulse with a life of their own. There, at the center of the room, was the old wooden table. It was the same table that had been in the photograph, the same table that had witnessed the original betrayal. This was where it had all started, the place where the curse had taken root. Lisa approached it slowly, her eyes scanning the room, looking for any sign of movement, any indication that the curse was watching her. She placed the knife on the table, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared herself for what she had to do. The ritual wasn't simple, it required more than just a physical act. It required a willingness to confront the past, to acknowledge the wrongs that had been done, and to accept the responsibility of undoing them. It wasn't just a battle with an unseen force, it was a battle with herself. As she placed her hand on the table, she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her, but she refused to let it break her. The man from the photograph had begged her for help, and now, it was time to fulfill that promise. She had to break the curse, not just for her family, but for everyone who had been lost to it. The words of the ritual came to her, as if they had been etched into her soul all along. She began to speak, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. The words were ancient, passed down through the generations, and as she spoke them, she felt the power of the curse begin to shift, to waver. It was working. The energy in the room changed, and for the first time, Lisa felt the weight of the curse lifting. But then, a sharp, cold wind swept through the room, and the lights flickered. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. The curse was fighting back. It wasn't going to let go without a struggle. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, and Lisa could hear the faint whispers again, the voice of the entity that had claimed this place, that had claimed her family. She kept her hand on the table, steadying herself. She couldn't stop now. She had come too far. The whispers grew louder, the air colder, but Lisa's voice remained steady as she spoke the final words of the ritual. The wind howled around her, but she didn't falter. This was it, the final test. With a sudden, deafening crash, the room was filled with an eerie silence. The curse was breaking. The shadows that had clung to the walls seemed to dissipate, the air growing warmer, lighter. Lisa opened her eyes, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the man from the photograph standing before her. He was no longer a figure of torment and despair. His face was peaceful, relieved. The curse had been broken, and he was free. Jamie appeared in the doorway, his face pale but unharmed. He had been watching, waiting, and now he could see the transformation, too. The diner, once a place of fear and suffering, now felt different. The darkness that had plagued it for so long had lifted, and for the first time in years, it was just a building, a place where people could sit and eat without fear. Lisa collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion, but she felt a deep sense of relief. It was over. The curse was broken. Her family was free. And in that moment, she knew that she had not only saved herself and Jamie, but also the generations that would come after them. The diner would never be the same again. It had been changed, transformed by the courage and strength of one woman who had faced the darkness head-on and emerged victorious. The legacy of the curse had been shattered, replaced by a legacy of resilience, redemption, and hope. And Lisa knew that she had been the one to break the chain, to end the terror that had haunted her family for so long. As she looked at Jamie, his eyes filled with gratitude and understanding, she knew that they had both been transformed. They were no longer just victims of the curse, they were its conquerors. And the future, for the first time, seemed bright.